let's get started. So my name is Sally Ramirez. I'm the art instructor at the center, and when we're normally open, I teach about 8 to 10 different classes throughout the week. But coming at you virtually, on Mondays I teach ceramic sculpture. On Wednesdays I teach, it's an art class, but I usually teach painting, and then on Fridays I get to do creative writing with you all. So we did an exercise last week called Sensing the Past. Hey Melita! And so, good to see you. We used our senses in order to enhance our creative writing. And today we're going to continue that lesson about leveraging our senses in order to create a more powerful piece that's both memorable and engaging to our readers. So, like I said, we're going to use our writings from last week, whatever that looks like. Maybe it was a couple sentences, maybe it was a paragraph, maybe it was like a set of words, maybe it was a drawing. Whatever it is, we'll cover some of that prompt, and then we'll move forward and add descriptor words on top of that. So if you need the link for last week's page, there's a few different ways that you could find it. You could browse this center page, look under videos, and find the archive. Or you can head over to our YouTube page, and I'll drop that link in the comment below. Or you can go onto my personal Center Members Creative Writing blog, and I'll drop that link in the comment below as well. So why are we focusing so much on the senses, especially in creative writing? Senses have the ability to make a scene come alive for the reader. It becomes that much more real, and it puts them in the experience of our writing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read a few sentences and reflect on why that's putting you in the scene or not. They're going to scaffold upon each other, so they're going to be very simple, and then as we go on, my hope is that they'll become more descriptive and thus have a more meaningful impact on you. So go ahead, stop, close your eyes, and just listen. First one is, I stepped on the grass. I stepped on the green grass. I stepped on the wet, mushy grass. I felt the dampness of the early morning dew through the gaps in my sandals. I felt the delicate blades of grass tickle into my toes as I walked. So what's going on for you? Which sentences are most memorable? I admit that the last two sentences, David wrote those ones. He has such a reflective quality about him, and he's an avid reader, which means that he has access to a lot more words and cadence of sentences, and he's a very romantic gentleman, so it doesn't surprise me that those last two sentences came from him, where I can tend to be a little more direct and to the point, and so what came up for me was just, I stepped on the wet, mushy grass. Like, that for me was putting more descriptor words in it. So it just goes to show you that depending on style, we all have a different way of communicating and enhancing our senses and sentences. So reflecting on those few sentences, I'm not only thinking about which sentence gave me a beautiful visual, but also which sentence made me slow down and pay attention to the world around me, in this case, the natural world. I'm also thinking about how each sentence, as it went on and became more descriptive, I was being shown what was around me as opposed to being told what was around me. So instead of telling me, like, it was a nice day out, it was a beautiful day out, instead we moved from telling me that to showing me that, or showing the readers that. It was green outside, the sun was bright, my face was paler than usual because my face was lit up by the sun. So we're describing it more to the reader, and we're helping make that scene come alive so that it feels like they were there as well. Now, when you're writing, if the first sentence is all that comes out on your page, basically like I stepped on the grass, that's okay. So that's what happens with me as well, is that that's why there's editing and that's why there's drafts. You come back to that writing and you analyze it and you think, is there any place for me to insert more descriptor words, more activate some of the senses here? If I'm stepping on that grass, what does it feel like? What does it look like? What does it smell like? It depends where you want to take the reader. I happen to be focusing more on the visual aspect of it, which is a green, and then also the way that it felt. But maybe you would take it somewhere differently with different senses. Also, something to reflect upon too is that, like I had spoken about David and I, those first few sentences, maybe those are more of your style, like mine, versus David's style had more flowery language, a lot more descriptive, sensual words. And that's okay. There are famous writers who are more direct, to the point, like Ernest Hemingway, for example. So it could depend on style. The purpose of these exercises is that I want to be able to expose and offer you the options of exploring your work through senses, and at least having that option, as opposed to not knowing how to fluff up your work and make it more immersive for your reader. So the last thing that we'll do today is that I'm going to dive into the writing that I prepared for you all last week. And then we're going to choose a few places to, quote, enhance that sentence or that area or that paragraph. Then we'll reflect on it, and then you all will have the chance to do it on your own. So sit back, close your eyes, get comfortable, because I'm about to read to you all the passage that I wrote last week. Our garden. Sometimes all it takes is a sound or any of our five senses to trigger a memory. Whenever I hear a wind chime, it's like whispers of my grandmother's home. She's no longer alive, nor is that home in our family anymore. But when I hear the chime, I'm with her again. I'm 7 years old, eating a blueberry Yoplait yogurt and planting watermelon seeds in our garden. Her garden. Or it was our garden. At dusk, we'd water the garden together. She'd hand over the hose and say, "Don't forget to cap it," I'd exclaim as my thumb capped the hose end. The water sprayed in the shape of a ginkgo. He swayed the hose from left to right, between the grasses and the roses, like a metronome, back and forth, back and forth, the smell of grass filling my nose. My eyes closed. I stepped forward, rocked the hose between the grass and the roses, back and forth, back and forth, the damp earth cradling my feet. After 8 paces, sometimes 9 depending on the length of my step, my foot would meet the brick. I'd smile, open my eyes, and laced with blush roses, my grandmother's favorite. So this is a passage that always brings me peace when I go back to it, especially during times of the season of quarantine where there are moments of anguish, uncertainty, but then there are some moments of certainty, hope, and peace. And this is always a nice passage to come back to. So when I'm reading through this the second time, it's probably like my third or fourth by now, but so let's just call it the second time. When I'm reading through this the second time around, what I'm doing as I'm reading it is looking for areas in which I want to expand upon. What are the areas that I want to really emphasize and add more description to it, and enhance those areas with words that are from the senses, from our senses. So as I'm reading over this again, I realize that there's not much description about my grandmother, which is quite a missed opportunity, because she was such an important part of my life. She was someone who was so giving, someone who was so loving and peaceful. And instead of saying that in the writing, instead of inserting, well, at dusk we would water the garden together, she was really sweet, I love my grandmother, she was the nicest person ever. Instead of saying those things, I'm going to show you all that. I'm going to show the reader what that means. So I prepped for this lesson with you all, and I wrote a piece that I think might be more fitting. Again, this will be my second draft, and then I'll come at it, I'll put it away, come at it into it a different day, read it, and see what I think. So, writing is all about revision, revision, revision. Okay, so let's read that sentence again, but instead I'm going to insert some new descriptors, a new paragraph, in order to focus more on my grandmother. Okay, so at dusk, we'd water the garden together. She waters first. She stooped over the rose bush. In one hand, the hose water is gushing into the base of the plant, and on the other hand, she's brushing the rose petals. Her hand is pale and thick, covered in dozens of sunspots. She retracts her hand from the rose, turns to me, and brushes her hair. A wide smile crosses her face. Her eyes almost disappear behind her plump cheeks. And then that's when I transition to she'd hand over the hose, say, "Don't forget to cap it," I'd exclaim, and then I'd cap it, and then the rest of the story flows. So by inserting this paragraph, I start to explore what she looks like. I start to explore how gentle she was with me when she's gently brushing the rose petals, and then she, in the same breath, with her same hand, she's gently stroking my hair as well. So instead of saying she was a gentle, kind person, I show you that in her actions. Another area that I expanded upon was, instead of saying that she spends a lot of time out here gardening, she's always out here in the sun, instead of saying that, I showed you all that by describing on her body how she has so many sunspots. And how do most people get sunspots? By being in the sun all the time. She was also someone who sunspots were always on her left arm, because as she was driving, she would have her arm outside of the window, and so the sun, that arm would get a lot more sun. Decided not to go into that here. That could be another draft where maybe I start to expand on that scene as well. I'm trying to keep it really simple and contained for right now, though. But as you can see, this, like, once you get immersed and once you describe the scene, you can take this in many different directions. I also, my grandma was a large woman, and so that's where I get a lot of my body structure as well. So I wanted to, instead of saying she was really big, she was plump, any of that, I wanted to instead describe how when she smiled, her cheeks filled up so much that they almost made her eyes disappear. So during our first draft, we might say things like, you know, the grass was green, my grandmother was, she was a thick lady, but then coming into the second and the third draft, that's when I start to explore, well, how would I know she was thick? Yeah, I could either describe that she had broad shoulders, or that she was short, and that she was plump around the middle. But I chose instead to focus on her face and show how that plumpness made her eyes disappear. So there's a lot of different ways that you can explore that. So I hope this starts to make some sense. We will continue to unpack these over the next few weeks, because I do think it's important that we stick with similar exercises in order to become more experienced and comfortable with what we're writing. There is a flow to writing. There is a space that's necessary to be in, a non-critiquing space, but there are chances, there are moments when you go back into that space and you're kind of balancing between the head and the heart space to create, but then also edit at the same time. But the first time you write, just let yourself go. If this is the first video that you've joined us for, just a reminder that the prompt for this actual exercise, just expanding upon our 5 senses about what memory brings you joy and such, is going to be in the first video. I'm going to link that in the comments below. I'm also going to link our YouTube page and our blog page. For now though, hopefully this gives you all something to explore. Do what you wish with this exercise, this offering. Excuse me. Last week something that we did was we painted, or we did a drawing or some sort of visual activity that inspired us from our original piece. So I encourage you, if that was something that was more accessible than writing, please feel free to do that instead. And then each week as we go through these exercises, hopefully your senses will activate more and more of what you see in the scene. So for instance, Dennis Lumley had posted a picture in which his drawing was of him and his grandmother, or his grandfather, and I believe his mother. And in the scene, his grandfather was on top of this, I forgot what he called it, but to me it was a tunnel in which there was water gushing out, and like a sewage spill. And his grandfather was perched on top of that, and he was fishing. And then Dennis was off to the side, more on the rocks, and he's just kind of watching. So maybe as he begins to explore more and more of his senses through these structured activities, maybe he'll start to, or I have a strong feeling, that he'll then begin to put more details within his drawing as well. So was there grass, was there brightness, was there shadows and light, because it was so bright outside. So now you can see how it's starting to transfer to different mediums. I'm going to give voice to what Leslie Lancaster's saying. She said, "I never saw myself as a writer, but over the last several years I've found a love for it, and seems to come more natural when writing about something is pressing on my heart." It's very difficult to write about something that you don't know. The same thing for when I did a lot of academic writing, and the professor says, "Well, write about global warming." It's like, ooh, okay, let me write. Now you had to do the research first, and then you had something to talk about. Whereas, like Leslie's saying, is that it's easy to call upon what she knows and be able to write about that. Always write what you know, and people will connect with that. And if some people don't, there will be those who do. So thank you all for joining me. Again, this is Creative Writing. This happens every Friday at 10 a.m. And then right afterward, it gets posted to the YouTube page. Have a great weekend. Don't forget that there's an 11 o'clock class live on our main page. And then there's also a 2 o'clock class today as well on the Center Member and YouTube page. All right. Bye, you all.